And I'll invite up Rabbi Rich, who's giving the message today.
Thank you. Well, Shabbat Shalom, everyone. Lech Lecha. What an amazing, amazing Parsha. It is truly amazing. And I would like to bring an insight from a section of the Parsha which we didn't read this morning. It's a little bit later in this section. And I'll give you the context here. So Abraham had a nephew named Lot. And Lot and he got along well until Lot's flocks and herds became too many, and Abraham's became so many, and there was fighting among the herdsmen, and it was creating problems in the family. So Abraham says to Lot, look, why don't you take whatever land you want, and wherever you don't go, I will go. And that way there could be peace. So Lot chose to pitch his tent toward, does anyone know where? Sodom. Sodom. You know, right? Sodom. Bad place, bad neighborhood, bad choice. And while he was there was something of a minor civil war among some of the local chieftains. They're called kings, but the word melech has the idea of a chieftain. It doesn't have to be like a king from King Arthur's court, you know, a big king with huge entourage. So anyhow, several of these things fought other of the kings, and Lot was taken captive. Abraham gets word about this, that his nephew had been taken captive, and so he goes after him and rescues him. Great moment. Abraham shows his stuff as a military leader and as one who was really committed to taking care of his family member. All good. Now, we pick up in the next section, and if you want to turn in your scripture, if you have a copy, we're in chapter 15 of the book of Genesis. So it says this, after this, the word of the Lord came to Avram in a vision. So he has a vision at night probably. Do not be afraid, Avram. I am your Magain, I am your shield, and your very great reward. All good, but Avram, at this point, is not so sure. So he asks God the following. Avram said, Sovereign Lord, what can you give me since I remain childless, and the one who you will inherit my estate is Eliezer of Damascus? So Abraham is saying, well, these are great promises, but I don't have an heir to pass on the inheritance to, so what good is it to talk about inheriting land and blessings, because it's all going to end with me, Lord God. I am old, my wife and I are elderly, we don't have any kids. What's going to be? And what's going to happen, I'm telling you, he says to God, is that Eliezer, who's been a terrific servant, but he's not part of our family, he's going to get it all, according to local custom, if you didn't have an heir. Then the word of the Lord came to him, so God responds, this man will not be your heir, but a son who is your own flesh and blood will be your heir. And he took him outside and said, look up at the sky and count the stars, if indeed you can count them. And then he said to him, so shall your offspring be. Now, living in the city, we don't know from a lot of stars. But if you've ever lived has anyone ever lived where there's lots of stars? You go outside, I see that hand. I see that hand. So in a rural area, and back then in the Middle East, of course, without no pollution from industry and no street signs, street lights, and he looked up and the sky was just filled with twinkling, gorgeous, beautiful stars and other heavenly bodies. And so God says, this is an example. I'm showing you a picture of what I'm going to do for you. Your descendants are going to be lots and lots and lots of people. Okay, this sounds great. And then it says that Avram believed the Lord, and it was credited to him as tzedek, as righteousness. So this is a very important moment in Avram's relationship with God, where he says, well, you said it, I see the stars, I'm choosing to believe you, and that is it. He also said to him, I am the Lord who brought you out of Ur of the Chaldeans to give you this land to take possession of it. So not only are you going to have lots and lots of descendants stretching for generation and generation, but this land here, of which you don't have anything yet, all of it is going to be yours. Now, Avram, again, I'm sure respectfully, says, Sovereign Lord, how can I know that I will gain possession of it? I mean, it sounds great, but is there any kind of sign, any kind of indication? I mean, right now, I don't own any of it. So I want to believe it. I do believe it, but it would sure be nice if I got some confirmation. Which brings us to the major passage I want to look at today, and I want to introduce you to a concept which is critically important for all of us for reasons I'll explain. So the Lord said to him, Bring me a heifer, a goat and a ram, each 3 years old, along with a dove and a young pigeon. And you wonder what's going on. Well, here's what happens. Avram brought all these to him, cut them in two, each of the animals, and arranged the halves opposite each other. The birds, however, he did not cut in half. Then the birds of prey came down on the carcasses, but Avram drove them away. And you wonder what is going on. Why would there be 2 rows of animal parts? Well, the text will explain, and I'll give some additional information for you. As the sun was setting, get this now, imagine it in your mind. It's a good way to enter into a sermon. The sun is setting. Avram fell into a deep sleep, and a thick and dreadful darkness came over him. He is having a profound, numinous experience here. Let's consider what it was like. Then the Lord said to him, Know for certain that for 400 years your descendants will be strangers in a country not their own, and they will be enslaved and mistreated there. But I will punish the nation they serve as slaves, and afterward they will come out with great possessions. You, however, will go to your ancestors in peace and be buried at a good old age. And in the 4th generation, meaning, here the word generations used loosely to mean roughly 100 years in context. It's a flexible term. In the 4th generation, your descendants will come back here, for the sin of the Amorites has not reached its full measure, the judgment on the local peoples. When the sun had set, now get this, the sun is set, God gave him additional information about the future of his family. They're going to be 400 years, we know where, in retrospect. It was Egypt, but he wasn't sure at that point. Now the sun sets, darkness has fallen, and notice this, a smoking fire pot with a blazing torch appeared and passed between the pieces. What is this all about? Well, the next phrase explains what's happening. On that day, the Lord made a covenant with Avram and said, To your descendants I will give this land from the Wadi of Egypt to the great river Euphrates on the west, the land of the Kenites, the Kenizzites, the Cadmonites, Hittites, Perizzites, Rephaites, Amorites, Canaanites, Girgashites, and Jebusites. Now, let me explain what's going on here. God made promises to Avram. And Avram, and I love the humanness of the account. It doesn't sound idealized. It sounds like a real guy wondering what's going to happen, because here I am, and you're making these great promises, and how do I really know? Okay. So, he has this numinous supernatural experience. He falls into a kind of sleep, but he's obviously aware enough to know what's happening. There are the 2 rows of animal parts right here, one here, and a fire, symbolic of God himself, passes between the parts. Again, what does this mean? Let me tell you. In this period, in the 2nd millennium before Yeshua, it was a method of forming covenants, and that's our critical word, covenant. a way of making a solemn agreement included, if you were going to make an agreement that was of real import, you would slay some animals, put them in 2 rows, and both parties would pass between the parts as if to say, here's the meta-communication, here's the message, here's what the parties would understand. If I don't fulfill my side of the bargain in this covenant, may what happened to these animals happen to me. Now notice, God does not ask Avram to pass through the parts at this point. Here he is demonstrating that he can be counted on, and if he doesn't fulfill his promises to Abraham, this is the Lord God speaking, may he suffer the consequences of death. May he suffer his own death in a real sense. And so this is covenant making. And I want to talk with you this morning a little bit more about covenants because they are incredibly important for us to understand. And so let me turn to my notes here. What's a covenant? Well, a covenant is an agreement between 2 parties. In the passage we've read, the emphasis is on God's making a solemn promise to Avram. The emphasis isn't so much on Avram's being the second of the 2 parties. That's implicit, but it's not explicit in the passage. However, as we understand covenants generally in the ancient Near East and in our own day today, it is an agreement between 2 parties. And we get this. We live with this. Have you ever bought a house? If you have, you've entered into a covenant with the bank if you took out a mortgage. The bank promises you, we will give the owner of the house the money, and you're promising us that every month you're going to pay it back with interest. This is what we know. Have you ever bought a car from a dealership? Unless you paid cash, then you understand a lease is a form of covenant, or purchasing a car, or in your job. I mean, it's obvious. When you go to work, you're saying, I'm making a covenant with this company. I will give you 40 hours of my best efforts, and you will give me a paycheck. And if you're at MIT, it's the same story. If you're at college, it's the same story. I will do my homework. You will give me a diploma. If you don't do your homework, I'm harassing Josh here a little bit. If you don't do your homework, you don't get the diploma. That's the way it works. So covenants are part of life, or being part of a community. You become part of Ruach Israel as a formal member, and you're saying, listen, I'm going to be faithful, and we're saying we're going to be faithful to you, and we encourage that, of course. Or as something as plain as going to the dry cleaner. I will give you my shirts, and I will pay you to get them back if you clean them and press them and no buttons are missing. We're talking covenant here. Now, I want to talk about covenant in its more moral dimensions, and I'd like to talk to you from one of the great moral treatises of the 20th century, Horton Hatch's The Egg. You with me on this? Are you familiar with this book? Raise your hand if you're familiar with this book. A lot of you are. Anyone over here? Now, I'm not going to read you Horton Hatch's The Egg. I am tempted, and by the way, if you get a chuckle out of some of the things that we talk about here, I want you to laugh. You know why? Because I'll say this is all parenthetical. We, because of the pressures of the moment we're living in, as a society, are forgetting how to laugh. And that is a tragedy. End of that sermon. We'll continue with this sermon. So anyhow, now Horton Hatch is a who? Well, the basic idea is Maisie the bird doesn't want to sit on her eggs. She wants to go to Florida for a vacation. Horton is there and she goes, oh, I would love to take a vacation. Horton, would you please sit on my eggs until they hatch? And Horton says, I don't know, I'm awfully big. Oh, you'll do a great job. Don't worry. Don't sit too hard, but you're going to be fine. And I'll be back real soon. And so Horton says, well, okay. And he climbs up into the tree and he sits on Maisie's egg, and he sits, and he sits, and he sits. And Maisie doesn't come back quickly. And the other animals start making fun of him. Look at that elephant in the tree. What are you doing up there, man? You're an elephant. Come on. I mean, really. And Horton, he's sitting there. And the critical thing that Horton says, and the reason I mention this to you, is what does Horton say? I meant what I said. Remember? And I said what I meant, an elephant faithful 100%. Can we hear that again, please? I meant what I said, and I said what I meant, an elephant faithful 100%. You see, it's all about covenant. He makes an agreement that he promises to fulfill, and he does even when hunters come, and he's sitting there and they have their big guns trained on him, and he will not get down. And the hunters say, well, wait a second, this is unusual. Let's sell him to the zoo. So they take him to the zoo, and the story has a happy ending when a little elephant bird comes out and all is well. But I want to talk with you very plainly about the importance of what's happening in the passage in Lech Lecha, and particularly against the backdrop of the moment that we're living in history. And I'm not going to elaborate. You don't need any elaboration. But I'm telling you, I'll be 70 real soon. I have never lived through a period like this. This is unique. I remember the Kennedy assassination. I was kicked out of the classroom for being a bad boy. Andrew Hugel, the class clown, was out also. He came up to me, he said, the president was shot. I said, what? And it was a horrific moment, and historians and others say America lost its innocence at that point. That was a horrible thing, absolutely horrible. I remember the Vietnam War. Some of you may remember it too. But I have never experienced anything like what we're going through now. This is really something. And so not only can we lose our humor, but we can lose or not cultivate a strategy for making it through life victoriously and happily, joyfully, and in an overcoming way because of all the ubiquitous, ever-present stress that you could feel that comes from every angle because of all the things that I, again, choose not to mention in specific. But I want to tell you something, and this is important. Living a life of covenant is like a life force comes into you. Covenant is a life force. It is a way we gain meaning and confidence and optimism, and that being true especially during very uncertain times. It is a time of fulfilling what one says and expecting others to fulfill what they say to us so that you can live with a sense of security and well-being and that all essential sense of continuity in the midst of circumstances that you know what's coming, invisible enemies. Again, you know what I'm talking about. It's simply knowing that you're safe because God has your back. And that is the essence of what God promised Avram. And we're going to see a further outworking of his moving between the parts in a little while. But this is what you're talking about. We need to discern at this moment the importance of keeping covenant with the people in our lives. And that means everybody to varying degrees and in varying ways that is appropriate to each relationship. You're not going to treat your husband or wife differently than you're going to treat a brother or sister or the mailman. But we're talking about covenants. We're talking about covenants. Now, Yeshua is the great covenant maker. He's the great covenant keeper. He took the hit for us out of his sense of covenant with Am Yisrael and by extension with all the people of the world because we had blown it badly, as we clearly know. And he takes the hit for us, demonstrating his faithfulness to us and God's faithfulness to us. And this takes us right back to the covenant between the parts. Because what we can say in retrospect, and that Avram might not have known, but we can see, is that in a real sense, God passes through the parts not only to indicate His commitment to the covenant, but in Yeshua, God takes upon Himself the disobedience and the recklessness and the unconcern and the hate and the vindictiveness of the entire human, which is so much part of the entire human experience, not the whole thing, but it's a significant part. And Yeshua in us passes through the parts because He has taken upon Himself that role as the one who had broken the covenant. Not that He had broken it, but He takes upon Himself the penalty for all of us. In Him, we passing through the parts recognize that we have not been faithful. God has been faithful. Yeshua has been faithful. We have not been. But in Him, we are forgiven. And in Him, we have covenant with the God of Israel. So what's the whole point here? God is the supreme maker and keeper of covenants. And He demonstrates it through amazing sacrificial love. He demonstrates it through the beauty of creation on a day like today. And let me tell you, these outdoor Shabbats, we love them so much. Come every time you can, because in another 3 weeks or so, we're done. We can't. It'll be too chilly. Okay, but what I'm saying is that His love for us, by providing for us the atonement, the one who passes through the parts, because He actually was split, if you will, for us, that it is the most amazing, wonderful thing. And I just want to encourage us all as a strategy for living. I'm not interested in giving you abstract ideas that have no relevance for life. As a strategy for living, I want to encourage you to walk in covenant with God, give it your best shot, walk in covenant with one another, and you can be assured, because it's the same God who made the promise to Abraham, that if you walk with Him, no matter what things come your way, it's gonna be okay. And even the struggles and trials will make you a better, deeper human being, more empathic, more able to understand both your strength and your vulnerability. And that's what times like this can do if we choose to walk in covenant. I leave you with that encouragement. One more time from Horton. I meant what I said. I said what I meant. An elephant faithful, 100%. Let's try and be like Horton. Shabbat Shalom, everybody.